Through his vast network of spies, Healy would often come up with recordings of Cosell's tirades. Like the day in New York when Cosell was in a hurry to record several of his radio shows at the ABC studios before catching an early morning train to Philadelphia.
We aren't quite prepared to take you in now. Is it at all possible that we can do all three at 7:20?
I've got a train to make. That's why this was set up last week. I'm doing Philadelphia. Now, who goofed? I've got to know. Ken Coughlin set this all up last Wednesday.
If we go with the first one and get it out of the way. We close it, we have to wait, that's all.
All right, we'll put up the tape.
It's all right to say I'll have to wait, that's all. But if I miss my train and miss a television network assignment, then it's not going to be that's all. Now, I've got to know who goofed.
Well, Howard made it back to Philadelphia, and Jim Healy had a wonderful voice track. ABC sportscaster Al Michaels, who grew up here in Southern California and was always a big Healy fan, worked with Cosell for a number of years. Al, was Howard aware of his West Coast critic?
Howard was aware of everything. Howard would be aware of criticism in agate type in the Des Moines Register within 3 minutes. So even though Howard would tell you he knew nothing about it, Howard knew exactly who Jim Healy was. He knew what Jim Healy was doing. And even those of us who worked very closely with Cosell through the years got a great kick and a great charge out of who goofed, I've got to know.
Well, now, when did you decide to record that track for Jim Healy?
Well, what I did, Steve, is I actually appeared on another KMPC show one day and said it. And then, of course, Jim lifted it, and it became part of the Healy highlight. And I guess it reached the point where a lot of people didn't know the difference between Howard and me.
I really hate this show.
Although Cosell left Monday Night Football at the end of the 1983 season, Jim continued to poke fun at him. And then in 1987, a new whipping boy was found, Dan Deerdorf.
Deadline, Buffalo, automatic timing department. ABC's Monday Night Football crew's in Buffalo tonight, and we'll hear them as usual from 6 to 9 p.m. here.
Right. Get to the point.
Well, in the 70s and 80s, we could always count on hearing the most obnoxious personality on the air every Monday night. And it's no different in the 90s, thanks to ABC's new most obnoxious, Dan Deerdorf. Same time, same station.
You can't get any more timely than that.
In fact, they've resurrected the same joke about Deerdorf they used to use on Cosell. He can light up a room just by leaving it.
Another major contributor to the Healy voice track library was Gene Price. Gene was a morning disc jockey at KLAC. And Gene, how many impersonations did you record for Jim's show?
Steve, I did, at the time I was working at the Comedy Store, and I was trying to do, I had a whole routine based around, probably around 50, 60 voices that I used. Now, some of the ones that Jim wanted me to use basically dealt with sports. It was Joe Garagiola. Howard Cosell is the one that he asked me to use, that he used frequently. We had a couple, about 5 or 6 tracks. He picked out 2. And those 2, I guess, were ongoing for 20 years or whatever.
I don't think that's funny. Jim Healy, you've got a weak show.
How about Jimmy Carter?
First of all, Jim, that's not a very nice thing to say, but I'll say this right now. Say it again.
Don't call me Jimma.
I wish you'd stop calling me Jimma.
And how about President Reagan?
Oh, shut up. Well, as you know, Jim, it's your show. Do what you want to do.
Then there was another suspicious character used quite often. Every time Jim gave the odds or solved a burning sports dilemma, his friend Bruce responded with,
"Thank you, Jim."
Was that your voice?
No, that was actually Jim's roommate. No, that's a joke. No, Steve, actually, Jim was dating him at the time. Hey, Jim, I know where you are, and I know you're listening, and you better watch it.
We have pretty well established that the Jim Healy Show was a one-man operation. The host did it all. Jim was writer, producer, researcher, engineer, and talent. He even answered his own phone, never even had a secretary. However, there was one job he didn't do: edit tape. That was the responsibility of his longtime associate, John Fells, the operations director at KMPC. During the final 9.5 years, whatever tapes Healy collected, John would edit them to time and content. John, of the hundreds of tapes in the Healy library, which ones were the most popular?
I'd say the Lasorda Kingman tape ranked number 1, but right behind it was Jerome Brown.
We didn't come here to act monkeys for everybody. We came here to play football, you know what I mean?
How many times did we enjoy that one? On the line is Rich Dalrymple, PR director of the Dallas Cowboys. In 1987, when Jerome uttered those now famous words, Rich was sports information director at Miami University. Rich, lead us through that famous Jerome Brown incident.
Well, it was a dual-team function prior to the 1986 Fiesta Bowl with the Miami Hurricanes. It was the number 1 ranked team in the country, and Penn State, which was number 2. And it was an annual event at the Fiesta Bowl. It was called the Steak Fry, and it was an outdoor event where both teams were invited out to eat and then get up on the stage and perform some comedy or musical skits. And the Penn State players went first and said and did some things, evidently, that got the ire of our players up a little bit. When our guys got up to perform, Jerome went up and said, "Hey guys, we didn't come here to sing songs and have fun with the other team. We came here to play a football game," and made his now infamous Pearl Harbor remarks, and the team got up and walked out. It was intended in good fun, and that's the type of guy Jerome was.
I'd like to ask you guys one thing. Did the Japanese go and sit down and have dinner with Pearl Harbor before they bombed them? No! Well, fellas, let's go.
Unfortunately, Jerome Brown lost his life a couple of years ago in a single-car crash near his Florida hometown.
And you know, Bob, Jim was always ready to pounce on local sports personalities whenever they committed a boo-boo. Whether it was a former USC athletic director introducing his new coach,
George Raveling,
or Jim Herrick, UCLA's basketball coach.
It's going to be another ball burner.
How did that happen, Coach?
Steve, on an interview on KMPC before in a pregame show, instead of saying barn burner, I said ball burner, and lo and behold, the great Jim Healy picked it up, and it was an institution for a couple years on his show. He played it sometimes 6 and 7 times a night.
Well, you know, it was an honor to be recognized by the old master to that extent.
From all the years I've spent in Los Angeles, Jim is a tremendous innovator. A lot of people even tried to copy him through the years, but there was only one Jim Healy. The thing that I always remember, he always made me laugh, and I enjoyed that about him.
Dayline, Sunset Strap, late NCAA line. On the JK Sports Journal board, UCLA is 4 points over Tulsa tomorrow night.
It's going to be another ball burner.
Tip-off's about noon tomorrow with an 11:15 a.m. airtime on KMPC.
It's going to be another ball burner.
I'm Steve Bailey with Bob Rowe. He didn't do it very often, but once in a while, Jim used his clout to prove a personal preference. Joe Quazzarano is executive sports producer at KTLA. Channel 5 is the longtime TV home of the Angels. Well, back in 1991, Joe picked 2 announcers for the games, and both were named Ken. Ken Wilson and former Major League pitcher Ken Brett. Wilson referred to Brett as Kemmer. It was a nickname Brett had had since childhood. Well, Healy didn't like it, and he harped about it on his show night after night. Joe, what was Jim's objection?
His objection was that wasn't his name. And I don't know if he was cognizant of the fact that was Kemmer's nickname as a kid. Having 2 announcers named Ken, it got a little confusing. So when Ken Wilson started calling him that, I thought it was fine. In fact, I picked it up, too. That way I could distinguish when I was talking to the 2 of them from the truck. Healy harped on this so much that Ken Wilson finally backed down and started calling his partner Ken again.
And from time to time, Jim was critical of some of your other announcers.
Yes, Jim was highly critical of KTLA and me in particular when we hired Reggie Jackson as color analyst for the broadcast. He got on me both on the phone and on the air, and he quite honestly had trouble with Reggie's ego. He really liked Joe Torre. He was the first to admit that when Joe first started with us, he wasn't an announcer, but within 1 season developed into a very good analyst.
And Jim got a kick out of giving his listeners the TV sports ratings. Were you the source for that information?
Yes. We get a printout of the local, the LA market ratings every morning, and we talked regularly at least 3 times a week. He always would want the numbers on, obviously, the major events, the Super Bowl and Angels and Dodger games, and anything that affected the Los Angeles market. And it wasn't like I was telling you tales out of school. The ratings are public records, and so I was glad to give it to him.